Rick Ness just silenced every critic and rival in the mining game with one of the boldest paydays of the year, a jaw-dropping $4 million gold haul. This isn't speculation. This isn't hype. These are hard numbers stacked in front of him, and they've left the competition scrambling to figure out how he pulled it off. In a season where setbacks, failures, and rising costs crushed many crews, Rick didn't just survive. He came out on top with a haul big enough to dominate headlines and shake the entire gold rush landscape. What makes this even more shocking is how fast it happened. Rivals thought Rick was finished, wrote him off as just another miner on the decline, but he flipped the script and delivered one of the most profitable seasons of his career. $4 million in gold means equipment paid off, crews secured, and a powerful message sent. Rick Ness isn't just back. He's setting the pace. While others argue about efficiency and strategy, Rick is cashing in, proving that guts, grind, and a relentless drive can still crush the odds. $4 million speaks louder than words, and right now, Rick Ness is the name everyone's talking about. If you want to know how things get even bigger after this $4 million season, like and subscribe now. You won't want to miss it. The weigh table groaned under the weight as Rick's crew dumped pan after pan of shimmering gold, the pile swelling higher than anyone expected. Under the harsh glare of floodlights, the glitter seemed alive, casting fire across steel walls, clinking in heavy cascades. Every nugget was a defiance of doubt, every flake a punch in the face of those who had written him off. Parker's trademark grin faltered, his arms crossed tighter as he leaned forward in disbelief. Tony Beats's eyes narrowed, lips moving in an unspoken curse, while nearby crews froze in silence, their breaths caught between awe and envy. Numbers on the scale flickered upward, then locked in place. More than $4 million in raw Yukon gold, a sum so staggering it became its own character. Heavy, commanding, undeniable. The narrator's voice cut through the stunned air, declaring what no one had dared to predict. The underdog had rewritten Yukon history. But this mountain of treasure didn't come from easy luck. It was forged out of near collapse, the ashes of a career everyone thought was finished. Not long ago, Rick's name was synonymous with failure. Equipment sat broken in the mud, debts piled higher than pay dirt, and once loyal crew members walked away, tired of chaos and broken promises. Mining forums laughed, fans predicted his permanent exit, and whispers around Dawson labeled him a cautionary tale. To many, Rick Ness was finished, another dreamer swallowed by the unforgiving ground of the Klondike. Yet here he was, standing taller than the empire builders who once mocked him. The gold reframed everything. Failure was not the end of his story. It had been the crucible, burning away weakness and leaving only iron resolve. Industry veterans, men who lived and died by Yukon tradition, now compared Rick's journey to the great legends of the North. Miners who had faced ruin, only to claw their way back into glory with a single strike. And no one felt the sting of that strike more than his rivals. Parker Schnabel, the golden prodigy whose empire seemed untouchable, sat stunned, realizing the crown might be slipping from his grasp. Tony Beats muttered something low in Dutch, a rare moment where respect edged into his voice, but pride stopped him from saying more. Around them, contrasts screamed louder than words. Rick's battered machines and skeleton crew had just outproduced multi-million-dollar fleets run with military precision. Even the Discovery producers, who had quietly prepared Rick's end-of-the-road narrative, scrambled behind the cameras. The $4 million tally didn't just shock the claim site, it sent ripples straight through the Klondike. Speculation erupted almost immediately. $4 million worth of gold doesn't just appear without reason, and in the Yukon, every rival wanted to know, how did Rick Ness find ground so rich, so untouched, when every inch of the territory had supposedly been picked clean? Whispers circled Dawson like wildfire. Some claimed he had stumbled onto a forgotten deposit left behind during the early Klondike rush, a place old-timers swore was cursed or unreachable. Others muttered that he must have uncovered a lost channel of gold, an ancient vein buried deep by glaciers, sealed away for over 10,000 years until Rick's machines clawed it back into the light. The air was thick with theories, but none explained the truth. Around town, old miners started digging up stories long buried. Local lore resurfaced. The tale of the sleeping river, a channel said to twist beneath the ground, invisible on modern maps, carrying nuggets the size of fists. For generations, prospectors hunted for it, but every attempt ended in empty pans or machinery swallowed by mud. Now, with Rick's haul laid bare, Dawson's elders began whispering again. Had Rick awakened the sleeping river? Had the land itself finally yielded its prize? Leaked documents added fuel to the fire. Old survey charts, decades forgotten in archives, suddenly circulated among miners. Jagged pencil lines marked regions long dismissed as unprofitable, until Rick's bulldozers showed otherwise. Rumor had it he gambled everything on this overlooked data, digging where no one else dared. Some said he had gone further, holding secret meetings with geologists under the cover of night, buying quiet counsel that pointed him toward an invisible mother lode. Rivals grumbled, their pride wounded, insisting no one could be that lucky. The conclusion was unavoidable. Rick hadn't simply mined dirt, he had cracked a Yukon riddle, one hidden beneath ice and legend, and unlocked a treasure everyone else had walked past for a century. If the ground held secrets, Rick's machinery nearly stopped him from revealing them. Every piece of equipment he owned was a relic, more fit for a scrapyard than the gold fields. Excavators coughed smoke, dozers shuddered under strain, and wash plants groaned like dying animals. Day after day, bolts snapped, engines seized, and hydraulics bled out into the mud. Rivals mocked him openly, saying no man could build an empire on rusted iron and hope. But while others laughed, Rick's crew worked by flashlight, welding through the night with sparks scattering across frozen ground. Broken tracks were patched with scavenged parts, fan belts replaced with improvised straps, duct tape sealing leaks no one thought repairable. The footage tells the story better than words. Exhausted men with blackened faces hammering machines back to life, sweat freezing on brows as they bent steel in the cold. Viewers could see desperation itself turned into ingenuity. A wash plant that should have died in spring ran until fall, coughing out ounces with every load. A dozer that rivals dismissed as scrap became the blade that unearthed one of the richest veins of the season. The irony cut deep. While Parker and Tony boasted fleets of brand-new Caterpillars, it was Rick's duct-taped survivors, scarred and rattling, that tore the jackpot free from the earth. Audiences marveled at the sight, the pure absurdity of it. How could machines that looked ready for the graveyard deliver millions? Yet the image carried a deeper message. It wasn't the shine of the iron that mattered, it was the will behind it. Every patch, every weld, every crude repair was a testament that Rick's crew refused to surrender. The gold became proof that determination and grit could outmatch even the most polished empire. And behind those machines stood a crew unlike any other. Men who had once walked away, burned out by failure and betrayal, came back to risk it all again. They didn't return for money alone. They came for Rick. Scarred by chaos, they chose loyalty over certainty, unfinished business over safety. Their personal confessions revealed it. Some believed they owed him, others wanted to see his redemption, and a few simply believed in him when the world didn't. Together they faced weeks where tempers snapped, where shouting matches broke out under the roar of engines, where exhaustion nearly pushed them to quit. But with each crisis survived, something changed. Bonds that had once fractured began to forge into iron. shared suffering turned doubt into unity. It became a mantra whispered through gritted teeth on the coldest mornings, either we strike or we die trying. In those words, the crew transformed from laborers into brothers in arms, staking not just paychecks, but their pride, their legacies, their very sense of belonging on the gamble of Rick's comeback. When the weigh table groaned under the mountain of gold, it wasn't just Rick Ness who stood vindicated. It was every welder who had worked until dawn, every driller who froze through the night, every hand that pushed machines past breaking. That $4 million payday was more than a number. It was their redemption, too. Proof they had carved their names into Yukon legend. And as word spread beyond the claim, Dawson itself seemed to pause. The gleaming piles under fluorescent light echoed the fevered nights of 1898, when stampeders filled whiskey bottles with dust and carried poke sacks heavy enough to rip canvas seams. Elders who remembered their grandfathers' tales whispered that this strike was different, something that carried the weight of myth. The ground finally yielded to the stubborn. One old-timer muttered in the bar that night, a phrase that spread across campfires like prophecy. The lore of the Klondike has always held that the land itself is alive, merciless to those who come greedy, but patient with the ones who endure. Myths resurfaced, carried on northern winds, tales of the ground that rejects outsiders, swallowing their machines in mud, silting their sluices with stone, driving them home in disgrace. Yet sometimes, once in a generation, the Yukon bends to the will of a miner who refuses to bow. Rick's victory was framed almost as a spiritual event. Rivals called it stubbornness, but to his crew and his believers, it felt like fate itself had demanded he prove his worth before opening its veins. His gold was not measured merely in dollars. It was cast as a symbol of destiny, of a Yukon spirit that rewards the relentless and punishes the arrogant. In Dawson, the reverberations weren't just mystical, they were economic. $4 million in raw gold shifted balance sheets overnight. Analysts began crunching numbers, pointing out that Rick's success wasn't just personal. It realigned the very hierarchy of the Klondike. Investors who had once laughed him off as a reckless dreamer now lined up with contracts, eager to attach their names to the comeback king. Rumors swirled of private equity firms offering him new claims, of silent partners whispering about expanding operations far beyond his ragtag patch. In the halls of mining conferences, Rick's name, once a footnote, was suddenly spoken with weight. The shockwave rippled through rival operations. Parker Schnabel, accustomed to dominating headlines, now felt pressure from backers demanding he prove he was still the top dog. Tony Beets, the Viking king of dredges, faced hard questions about why his empire hadn't pulled numbers like Rick's. Crews across the Yukon quietly cursed his success. The bar for survival had just been raised, and mediocrity would no longer be tolerated. What was once a competition became an arms race, each miner scrambling to match the gold mountain Rick had unveiled. Industry media seized on the moment, branding Rick as the comeback king of modern gold mining. Headlines screamed of redemption, of grit rewarded, of the underdog rewriting the rules. Viewers, enthralled by his transformation, elevated him beyond miner status into a cultural figure, the man who proved that belief and defiance could overturn the established order. The underdog narrative, once a survival story, evolved into something larger, a force that could shape Yukon economics, drive investment flows, and redefine who held power in the frozen north. Rick wasn't just a player anymore. He had become a catalyst, but beneath the gold's glitter lay shadows invisible to the cameras. Behind every triumphant shout at the weigh table was a scar, a bruise, or a sleepless night that no payday could erase. The truth bled out in confessions from his crew, stories of near disasters buried under editing cuts, a dozer that slipped on frozen mud nearly crushed a man before the winch pulled it free. Excavators froze solid under -40 winds, and men risked frostbite for hours, thawing them back to life. One welder still bore burns on his arm from a repair gone wrong, welding sparks igniting a coat as he tried to keep a plant alive at 3 in the morning. Families told their side too. Wives and children spoke of months without seeing their fathers, of phones that rang with bad news instead of comfort. Letters went unanswered. Birthdays passed by uncelebrated. The emotional cost stacked higher than ounces in a clean-up tray, invisible but heavier than the gold itself. For every viewer cheering at home, there were families at kitchen tables wondering if the risk was worth the sacrifice. Rick himself admitted what few leaders dare to confess. Despair nearly broke him. There were nights he sat in silence, staring at numbers that didn't add up, wondering if quitting was the only sane option. He confessed to crewmen that the burden of leading them weighed more than the ground beneath their boots. One breakdown away, one missed clean-out, one wrong decision, and the dream would have shattered again. The celebration painted him triumphant, but in truth, the line between glory and ruin had been as thin as a hairline crack in a bearing. The payday, magnificent as it was, could not erase the price. Every ounce of gold carried the imprint of exhaustion carved into it. Every dollar earned was streaked with the sweat, blood, and near-fatal mistakes that nearly ended it all. The world saw millions. The crew saw sleepless nights and frozen fingers. The Yukon demands a toll, and Rick's crew paid it in full measure. Yet even as the weigh table gleamed, that very mountain of treasure became something else entirely, a lightning rod. $4 million was too much for rivals to accept without suspicion. Whispers rose in Dawson bars, men muttering that no ordinary miner could stumble into ground that rich without bending the rules. Some claimed he had cut boundaries too close, stretching his claim lines into zones technically belonging to others. Others hinted at backroom deals, permits shuffled in ways that didn't add up, inspectors who conveniently looked away. Conspiracy theorists poured gasoline on the fire. On online forums and across social media, speculation exploded. Maybe Rick wasn't the scrappy underdog after all. Maybe shadowy investors had bankrolled him, pumping in silent millions to fuel a staged comeback. Some painted him as a front for bigger players who wanted a face the public could cheer for. Others claimed geologists in his pocket had steered him toward deposits no ordinary miner could find. To some fans, the narrative shifted. Hero or opportunist? Was his redemption genuine, or was it built on secret backing, clever manipulation, and carefully hidden alliances? Yet, in the absence of proof, the rumors only deepened the legend. The mystery itself became part of the story. To his supporters, the whispers of cheating were nothing more than the desperate claws of rivals who couldn't stomach being outdone. To his doubters, they were smoke pointing toward a fire yet unseen. Rick said little, offering no explanations beyond the gold on the table. His silence gave him an edge, leaving him enigmatic, untouchable. In the Yukon, reputation is currency, and even controversy can buy power. By refusing to answer, Rick became bigger than fact or fiction, a figure wrapped in uncertainty, his triumph impossible to fully pin down. The shockwaves forced rivals to respond, and they did not take long. Parker Schnabel, driven by equal parts pride and fear, vowed to return with what he called a monster season. He promised bigger paydays, new strategies, and investments designed to crush the doubt that Rick's success had sown in his empire. Parker's confidence masked unease. He knew investors and viewers alike expected him to reclaim his crown, and Rick's strike had shifted the bar to near-impossible heights. The pressure was no longer about profit. It was about legacy, about not being the man who let his empire fall to ashes while another seized the throne. Tony Beets, too, could not sit still. The Viking of the Klondike announced plans to unleash new dredge technology, resurrecting ideas once thought impractical and dead. If Rick's patched machines could spit out millions, Tony swore his engineering leviathans would swallow the river's whole and outmuscle anything Rick could dream of. For Beets, it wasn't just about reclaiming dominance, it was about pride, proving that experience and brute force still ruled over luck and scrappy ambition. Across the Yukon, other miners took note. Some were inspired. If Rick could rise from ashes, why couldn't they? Others were threatened, realizing their modest operations would now be measured against his towering payday. Quiet expansions began. More land was scouted, fresh investors courted, new machines ordered. The Klondike began to hum with a dangerous energy, an arms race ignited not by discovery alone, but by rivalry. Rick's success had transformed the battlefield. He had become the catalyst of a brewing gold war, the spark that forced every miner to gamble harder, dig deeper, and push further. The North was now bracing for conflict, not of weapons, but of ounces, pride, and legacy. For Rick, the noise outside faded in the glow of his own reflection. Standing before the mountain of treasure, he knew it represented more than just gold. It was survival itself. Each flake was redemption, each nugget a piece of validation that he had fought back from ruin. The 4 million was not just a number. It was proof that he could fall, be written off, mocked and doubted, and still carve his way back into the story of the Klondike. It was redemption measured in ounces, survival weighed in carats. His crew saw it the same way. These men, who had sacrificed months of their lives and endured more pain than the cameras ever captured, looked at the gold as more than a payday. To them, it was a monument, their names etched into Yukon lore, carved not into stone, but into the memory of every miner who would come after. They had forged something greater than wealth. They had forged legacy. Historians began to weigh in, comparing Rick's season to the great turnarounds of Klondike past. Stories of men who had nearly lost everything only to strike one miraculous claim were dusted off and retold with Rick's name added to the pantheon. The scale of his comeback wasn't measured merely in dollars, but in narrative weight. His story mirrored the myths of old, proof that the Yukon still had the power to craft legends in the modern day. Even rivals, though their pride kept their lips tight, admitted in private what few would say aloud. Rick's payday was a modern milestone. It would be remembered not just for the gold itself, but for the context, the improbability, the sheer defiance of it. $4 million carved from patched machines, a fractured crew, and ground no one believed in. It was the kind of victory that rewrites rules, silences doubters, and stands the test of time. The season didn't close with an ending because legends don't end. The cameras captured Rick Ness, crowned not by ceremony but by ounces, his rivals speechless, their silence louder than any cheer. The Mountain of Gold wasn't the final chapter. It was the turning of a page. Destiny was not fulfilled. It was only beginning. The Yukon had chosen its new contender, and with every shimmering ounce, Rick Ness had claimed his place in history.